The Republic's Venator-class Star Destroyer could carry, in the expanded universe's accounting, 420 starfighters, 192 V-wing starfighters, 192 Eta-2 interceptors, 36 ARC-170 starfighters, launched from a dorsal flight deck running half a kilometer along the ship's spine. The Galactic Empire looked at that ship, retired it, and replaced it with the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, which carries 72 TIE fighters. 72. Down from 420. That's not an evolution in doctrine. That's an 83% reduction in fighter capacity, and call it a promotion. The Empire genuinely did this. And the reason it ended badly is the same reason the Japanese Navy's plan fell apart on the morning of June 4th, 1942. Because both of them made the same fundamental mistake, and history had already run the experiment. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what the Venator actually was. Kuat Drive Yards designed the Venator for the Clone Wars, starting in 22 BBY. It measured 1,137 meters in length. Its designer, Lira Wessex, built it to do several things simultaneously. Fight capital ships with heavy turbolaser batteries, carry and deploy a full complement of starfighters, transport 2,000 troops, and haul 7,000 metric tons of cargo. Wookieepedia's canon entry describes it as capable of serving as both a combatant in ship-to-ship warfare and a starfighter carrier, simultaneously, in the same hull. The Legend's specifications break down the fighter complement to those 420 craft, noting additionally that 40 LAAT gunships and 24 military walkers were carried separately, not counted in that total. Even the current Disney canon acknowledges loadouts up to 92 starfighters, which still represents a genuine carrier capability by any measure. The dorsal flight deck opened along the ship's spine, a half-kilometer of launch capacity. The forward section contained passage bays on either side. This was the Swiss Army knife of capital ships, and the Republic built over 1,000 of them, deploying the largest concentration, upwards of 1,000 vessels, to defend Coruscant alone during the Battle of Coruscant in 19 BBY. Then the Republic became the Empire, and within a few years, those ships were being scrapped on planets like Braca. The Legend's entry on the Venator points to the reason directly. Its retirement came partially because its carrier-centric design ran against the emerging Tarkin Doctrine, and partly because of its prominent association with the Republic, an identity the Empire was actively trying to shed. Over-reliance on starfighters. That phrase is doing a lot of work, and it deserves scrutiny. But first, let's establish what replaced it. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer, also designed by Lira Wessex, measured 1,600 meters, 29% longer than the Venator. It carried 60 Time and Bach heavy turbolaser batteries, 60 heavy ion cannon emplacements, and 10 tractor beam projectors. It could carry 9,700 stormtroopers. It cost 150 million credits, compared to the Venator's 59 million. The Imperial-class was, by any raw firepower measure, a more powerful gun platform than anything the Republic fielded. And it carried 72 TIE fighters. The breakdown matters here. Of those 72 craft, 48 were pure TIE fighters, 12 were TIE bombers, and 12 were boarding craft or equivalent. The Wookieepedia entry on the Imperial-I class describes those fighters as specifically intended to function as the Imperial-class's point defense system. Not an offensive carrier strike group, not a power projection force. Point defense. The 72 fighters were there to stop enemies from getting to the Star Destroyer, not to reach out and destroy enemy assets at range. Now compare the two ships. The Venator launches fighters that go find the enemy. The Imperial-class launches fighters to protect itself. That's not the same job. That's not even close. Before we get into why this destroyed the Empire, it's worth going to the Pacific in 1942, because the Imperial Japanese Navy ran this exact experiment first, and left a very clear result. Japan's naval doctrine between 1905 and 1942 was built around a concept called Kantai Kessen. The phrase translates as fleet decisive battle. The theory came directly from American naval historian Alfred Thayer Mahan's writings, translated into Japanese and taught at the Imperial Naval Academy. The idea was straightforward. Concentrate your most powerful battleships, lure the enemy fleet into a single engagement, and annihilate them in one decisive surface action. Japan had done this successfully at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, destroying Russia's Baltic fleet in a day. The lesson the Japanese Navy took from Tsushima, and never really let go of, was that the battleship gun was the decisive weapon of naval warfare. From that doctrine emerged a companion philosophy, Taikan Kyoho Shugi, the principle of big ships and gigantic guns. If one decisive surface battle would settle the war, you needed individual ships individually superior to anything the enemy could field. The logical endpoint of that thinking was the Yamato. Laid down in 1937 and commissioned in December 1941, Yamato displaced over 69,000 tons. Her main guns were 46-centimeter naval rifles, 18.1 inches, the largest ever fitted to a warship, 9 of them in 3 triple turrets. She was designed to be unsinkable by anything in the U.S. Navy's inventory, and to destroy any ship she could reach. Japan planned 5 ships of the Yamato class. They completed 2 battleships and converted a third into the carrier Shinano. The remaining 2 were canceled. Japan built the biggest battleships in history, while simultaneously underinvesting in the carrier forces that had already demonstrated their power at Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto genuinely understood this. He'd advocated for naval aviation and carrier primacy, had even proposed abolishing the battleship entirely at the London Naval Conference. But institutions moved slowly, and Japan's naval hierarchy remained dominated by the battleship faction. The Yamato got built. Meanwhile, at Coral Sea in May 1942, carrier aircraft fought the first naval battle in history where the opposing surface ships never saw each other. Fighters and dive bombers did all the killing. Neither fleet's battleships fired a shot. The U.S. lost the carrier Lexington. Japan lost the light carrier Shoho and had Shokaku damaged. More critically, Japan lost dozens of experienced carrier aviators, a resource that can't be produced on the same schedule as a ship. But the strategic lesson, that carriers had replaced battleships as the decisive naval instrument, didn't fully register in Japanese procurement thinking. Then came June 4th, 1942. Japan sent its main carrier strike force, the Kido Butai, to Midway Atoll in the Central Pacific. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Supporting them at a distance of several hundred miles was Admiral Yamamoto's main body, anchored by Yamato herself. The U.S. codebreakers at Station Hypo had given Admiral Nimitz enough warning to position 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the urgently repaired Yorktown, which Pearl Harbor workers had restored in 72 hours after a damage estimate of 90 days, northeast of the island and waiting. At 10:20 a.m. on June 4th, the flight decks of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu were occupied with recovering, rearming, and refueling their Zero fighters, which had been fighting off successive American torpedo attacks. The hangars below those flight decks were packed with aircraft fueled for a strike mission, and, this matters enormously, fragmentation bombs that had been intended for a second Midway attack had been carelessly stacked in the hangars rather than returned to the magazines. As the PacificWar.org reconstruction of the battle documents, all 4 Japanese carriers could, at that moment, fairly be described as floating powder kegs. 30 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise found them. 17 Dauntlesses from Yorktown were coming in on Soryu. The Zeros that should have been flying top cover were at low altitude, dealing with the torpedo bombers. No fighters barred the dive bombers' descent. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey pushed over at 10:22. Lieutenant Dick Best's section followed immediately. In approximately 5 minutes, American bombs penetrated to the hangar decks of 3 Japanese fleet carriers and set off the ordnance stacked carelessly below. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were burning hulks by late morning. Hiryu survived and launched counterstrikes that damaged Yorktown, but Enterprise dive bombers found Hiryu that afternoon and hit her too. Soryu and Kaga sank on the evening of June 4th. Akagi sank just before sunrise on June 5th. Hiryu sank a few hours later. Yorktown, torpedoed by the Japanese submarine I-168 on June 6th, sank on the morning of June 7th. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, roughly 3,057 killed, and approximately 292 aircraft. The United States lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, about 340 killed, and roughly 144 aircraft. The asymmetry is the point. 4 carriers destroyed, 1 lost in return. And Yamato, the most powerful battleship ever built, the embodiment of Kantai Kessen, the ship the entire Japanese strategic plan had been constructed around, sat in Yamamoto's main body hundreds of miles behind the battle, never in a position to influence anything that happened. The order of battle at Midway lists her under the 1st Battleship Division of the main force, present in the operation from the start. She never fired her main guns. Yamamoto's own powerful surface force was functionally irrelevant to a battle decided entirely by carrier aircraft. He had the biggest guns in the world pointed at nothing. A 2001 Naval War College Review article by Parshall, Dixon, and Tully is titled "Doctrine Matters: Why the Japanese Lost at Midway." The title is the thesis. And a second Naval War College Review piece from 2005 by Thomas Wildenberg puts it this way: it was better doctrine that ultimately led to the American victory once the forces were engaged, a victory that changed the course of war in the Pacific. Doctrine, not luck, not numbers, doctrine. Now run that parallel back to the galaxy far, far away. Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin presented his strategic framework to Emperor Palpatine in 18 BBY, the Legends text of what became Imperial Communique 001044.92V, also known as the Tarkin Doctrine, or the Doctrine of Fear, contains his core recommendation: rule through fear of force, rather than through force itself. The canon version of the doctrine, from the Tarkin novel by James Luceno, and confirmed in subsequent reference material, frames it as a rule by fear, the contention that overwhelming displays of force, rather than force itself, were the most effective means of maintaining internal security and the loyalty of vassal worlds. Displays, not force. Displays. Tarkin's logic was that the Empire didn't have enough ships to garrison every star system simultaneously, and couldn't chase rebels across sector boundaries without jurisdictional complications. The solution? Make the punishment for defiance so catastrophic, so visible, that no planet would dare consider rebellion. You don't need to police everywhere if everyone believes you'll destroy them if they step out of line. His own words from A New Hope, spoken from the Death Star's command center, make the philosophy explicit. Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station. The Death Star was the Tarkin Doctrine made physical, but the doctrine also shaped everything below it, including the fleet. An Imperial Star Destroyer's job, per the pattern of Imperial military deployment, wasn't just to fight, it was to arrive and be terrifying. The imposing wedge silhouette, the massive turbolaser batteries, the sheer scale of a 1,600-meter warship entering orbit over a rebellious world, all of that was performance. Control through the fear of what the ship represents, not through actually using it. The Venator didn't fit that philosophy. A 1,137-meter carrier, with its primary purpose being to launch fighters, doesn't project the same primal dread as a gun platform twice as armed. And the Venator was visually associated with the Republic era. the wrong brand for a regime trying to establish psychological distance from its predecessor. So the Venator went to the scrapyard, and the Imperial-class, 60 turbolaser batteries, 9,700 stormtroopers, and 72 fighters to protect itself, became the face of Imperial power. This is where a reasonable counter-argument enters, and it deserves a fair hearing. The argument goes like this. Real-world carrier doctrine exists precisely because carriers are fragile. Fleet carriers of the Essex class during World War II were kept behind the engagement line, protected by screening ships, projecting power through their aircraft while staying out of direct combat themselves. If a carrier gets into a gun duel, the carrier loses. The Venator's design, a ship that was simultaneously a carrier and a frontline combatant, violated this principle. You're either a carrier or you're a battleship. You can't really be both without doing neither perfectly. This is a legitimate tactical point. The Venator's dual bridge design, with one tower handling starfighter operations and the other the helm, was specifically acknowledged in the lore as disrupting efficiency and communication between crew divisions. The Legends entry notes that the forward bow doors, which had to open to launch the full strike group, left the ship extremely vulnerable while open. A carrier that has to open itself up to deploy its strike package is a carrier that's briefly defenseless, which is why real-world fleet carriers don't want to be within gun range of anything hostile when they're conducting flight operations. The counter to the counter-argument is that the problem isn't unique to the Venator, and the Empire's solution was wrong. Every aircraft carrier in history has the vulnerability of needing to turn into the wind to launch aircraft, needing to be screened and protected, needing to stay out of direct surface engagements. The answer to that vulnerability, historically and logically, is to build better escort doctrine and better screening forces, not to eliminate the carrier entirely. The US didn't respond to carrier vulnerability at Coral Sea by scrapping its flat tops. It built more carriers and improved how they operated. The Empire took a ship with a genuine weakness and responded by building a ship with no carrier capability at all. The weakness was real. The fix was overcorrection to the point of self-destruction. Which brings us to the battles. The Battle of Yavin in 0BBY was the rebellion's first major victory. No rebel capital ships engaged the Death Star or its escorts in the main assault. The entirety of the attack force was starfighters, 22 X-wings and 8 Y-wings, 30 ships total. The Death Star's own defenses, as General Dodonna briefed his pilots, were designed to repel large-scale assault, not small agile fighters. Tarkin, standing in the Death Star's control room as the attack unfolded, dismissed it entirely and refused to evacuate. One X-wing, Luke Skywalker in Red 5, destroyed the most expensive weapon the Empire ever built with 2 proton torpedoes. Carrier doctrine in its purest form, a strike group of small, precise aircraft penetrating defenses and destroying a capital target the enemy had assumed was untouchable. The Kido Butai's strike on Pearl Harbor, McCluskey's dive bombers on Akagi. Same logic, different galaxy. At Endor in 4ABY, the rebellion deployed a more sophisticated combined force. Mon Calamari capital ships, including Home 1, alongside X-wings, Y-wings, A-wings, and B-wings. The capital ship engagement between Mon Cal cruisers and Imperial Star Destroyers stalemated. 2 battleship-style forces trading fire without decisive outcome. The B-wing had been purpose-built as a capital ship killer, described in canonical sources as a heavy assault starfighter and bomber, a dedicated blockade buster engineered by the Rebel Alliance. The rebellion understood the anti-capital ship fighter mission in a way the Empire had explicitly abandoned. The decisive blows at Endor came from fighters. Arvel Crinid of Green Squadron, flying an A-wing, made a trench run through the Executor's superstructure. His fighter took a laser bolt, spun out of control, and Crinid directed what control remained into a collision course with the Executor's unshielded command bridge tower. The A-wing crashed through the bridge windows and detonated. Admiral Piet and the entire bridge crew died with Crinid. Without command structure, Executor lost primary power, fell into the Death Star's gravity well, and collided with the station, a super Star Destroyer destroyed by a single fighter. Then Lando Calrissian in the Millennium Falcon, and Wedge Antilles in an X-Wing, flew into the Death Star's interior and destroyed the reactor. The second Death Star collapsed. The Empire's political military structure collapsed with it. 2 battles, 2 decisive superweapon destructions, both delivered by starfighters. The capital ships were support. The fighters were the instrument of victory. The Naval War College article's conclusion about Midway applies here without modification. Doctrine matters. The rebellion was running carrier doctrine. The Empire was running battleship doctrine. The outcome followed the doctrine. Yamato's actual combat record over her entire career is instructive. She spent most of the war at anchor or in transit, too valuable to risk and too slow to be useful. The only occasion she fired her 18.1-inch main guns at enemy surface targets came at the Battle of Samar on October 25, 1944, when she engaged U.S. escort carriers and destroyers. The results were limited. In April 1945, with the war functionally decided against Japan, Yamato was sent on Operation Tengo, a one-way suicide mission to beach herself at Okinawa and serve as a gun emplacement. On April 7, 1945, 386 American carrier aircraft attacked. She took approximately 11 torpedo hits and 6 bomb hits. She sank, killing 3,055 of her 3,332 crew. The most powerful battleship ever built, conceived to win a decisive fleet engagement that never happened, fired her guns meaningfully exactly once in 4 years of war, and was sunk by aircraft from carriers she was never designed to defeat. The Empire built their version of that ship. They built it deliberately, ideologically, in service of a doctrine that prioritized fear over function, and they lost to X-Wings. The Venator was already in service. It had won the Clone Wars. The capability was there, proven in combat, available to absorb into the Imperial fleet structure. Grand Moff Tarkin looked at it, decided it wasn't frightening enough, and chose superweapons and gun platforms instead. The Tarkin Doctrine's Legends entry is honest about what happened next. The Empire was never able to bring enough ships to bear to properly police the Outer Rim throughout the Galactic Civil War, and the Doctrine produced the opposite of its intended result. Alderaan's destruction turned its victims into martyrs and accelerated recruitment to the rebellion's cause. The threat of force failed to prevent rebellion. The actual application of force failed to end it. And when the rebellion fought back, it fought back with fighter-based strikes on capital targets, the exact warfare the Imperial fleet was least equipped to stop, and the exact warfare the Venator had been designed to project. The Naval War College article on Midway, published in the Naval War College Review, carries the subtitle, "Why the Japanese Lost at Midway." The Japanese Navy's conservative battleship faction dominated procurement decisions into 1941. Yamato got built, and carrier losses at Midway proved irreplaceable. The U.S. accelerated Essex-class carrier production. By 1943 and 1944, Essex-class carriers were entering service faster than Japan could replace what had been lost. By the time of the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Japan's replacement carrier pilots rushed through training with a fraction of the flight hours their predecessors had accumulated, were being shot down by U.S. naval aviators in such numbers that American sailors nicknamed it the Marianas Turkey Shoot. The force multiplier wasn't the whole. It was the doctrine and the trained personnel to execute it. Japan lost experienced pilots at Midway and Coral Sea that couldn't be replaced on any production timeline. The Empire's 72-fighter point defense fleet couldn't project power against a rebellion that had built its entire military around the exact mission profile the Imperial-class was never designed to defeat. Both the Empire and Imperial Japan made the same calculation. A sufficiently powerful, sufficiently terrifying single weapon system would paralyze the enemy before they could meaningfully resist. Japan put its faith in Yamato and the decisive battle doctrine. The Empire put its faith in the Death Star and the Tarkin Doctrine. Both calculations failed for the same reason, because the opponent didn't engage on the terms the doctrine required. The rebellion didn't send capital ships against the Death Star. It sent 30 fighters. The US at Midway didn't send battleships against Japan's carriers. It sent dive bombers. You can't win a decisive surface battle against an enemy that has no interest in fighting you at the surface. And you can't intimidate people into submission with a weapon that a single squadron can destroy once they know what to look for. The Empire had the Venator. They chose to retire it. The rebellion fought the war the Venator was built to fight. Carrier strikes on capital targets, fighter-led offensive operations, force projection at range. They won. The Empire, with its 72 fighter point defense battle fleet and its planet-killing superweapons, lost. Doctrine matters. The Japanese Navy proved it at Midway. The Galactic Empire proved it over Yavin and Endor. The only difference is that one of those happened, and the other makes for a better story. If you want more of these, the real history behind the fiction, the strategic logic underneath the lore, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.